All right, what's up, guys? My name is Tim Area. Once again, I'm here with another Unsung Pro Wrestling ERAS, sort of a video blog I'm doing, shooting from the hip. I don't have notes taken down. I'm just sort of doing this as a sort of a podcasty type open conversation. If you and I were sitting in my garage here talking about some of the greatest pro wrestling eras that don't get talked about, this is the kind of stuff I would be saying. I do have Wikipedia open to sort of help me going along with some of the pay-per-views and stuff like that. Going in order again. Oh, and we're not talking about the golden age of wrestling. Let's say the 60s, the 50s and 60s. We're not talking about the rock and wrestling era, 84, 85, 86. We're not talking about the Attitude Era, obviously being the Monday Night Wars, Stone Cold Steve Austin. We're going to say that's more 98, 99. And I am going in order. I did 1992 WCW. I did 1994 WWF. 1995 ECW. Now we're jumping to the end of 1996. The end of 1996 WCW. Now this to me technically is still not Attitude Era yet. The Attitude Era, like I said, didn't really sort of take effect until Degeneration X hit the scene and until Vince McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin were feuding. So that's more 90, probably the end of 97, beginning of 98. But right now I want to talk about WCW 1996, the end of 1996. Now again, WCW was not making a lot of money at the time. They were not a national powerhouse. They were more still a southern regional promotion that just so happened to have TBS behind it. TBS, I think, being the first superstation and one of the first stations to show national, I guess, stuff. Ted Turner and all his money. He invented CNN. But the NWO turn, obviously one of the biggest things in pro wrestling history, Hulk Hogan obviously turning heel, that happened at Bash at the Beach, which was July 7th of 1996. So what I sort of want to do, obviously everybody knows that Hogan and the Outsiders. Hogan comes out, drops the leg on Randy Savage and Sting. I think Luger might have gotten taken out, Luger might have gotten taken out. I don't remember. But I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to skip over the pay-per-view that followed Bash at the Beach, which was in August of that year, and that was Hog Wild, where we saw the Giant versus Hollywood Hogan. I think that's where Hollywood Hogan gets the title. But what I want to start is September of 1996. Again, so the last quarter of the year, September 15th, we had Fall Brawl of that year. Fall Brawl, I always love the Fall Brawl gimmicks. I always love War Games. It's a great concept, a Dusty Road concept. A lot of great matches in the War Games histories. Again, my favorite wrestler is Dr. Death Steve Williams. I know he wrestled in a lot of those. You saw, Dusty Rhodes, it was a lot of Four Horsemen matches, Road Warriors. But here in 1996, we had the first showings of the NWO versus WCW. And this was in the main event was Team NWO, which again, if you're going to make an NWO back then, I know they had some War Games matches or other gimmicky matches where they would use like X-Pac, Conan, Buff Bagwell, and Stevie Ray as an NWO team, which is sort of a jabroni NWO team. But here we got Hogan, Hall, Nash, and Fake Sting. And Fake Sting was obviously a big gimmick at the time. Everybody thought it was the real Sting joining NWO. So that's a great team. Going against Lex Luger, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Sting. This is where Sting came out and beat everybody up. Everybody thought he was joining an NWO, and he just comes out. He doesn't even really wrestle in the match. And it's funny because you got Anderson and Luger, they were horsemen, and then you had Sting and Luger who were pro WCW. So this is really all of WCW trying to overcome this big nasty NWO team. Great great main event. Great guys on both sides. Again, if you got Sting, Luger, Flair, and Arn Anderson on a team, that's basically almost if you were going to have a Mount Rushmore of WCW guys of that era. Those would probably be four pretty big contenders. But let's check the undercard again. You got Diamond Dallas Page in the curtain jerker against Chavo Guerrero Jr. DDP wrestled a lot of opening matches in WCW. When I was doing 92 WCW, he was an opening match guy. And here, this is 4 years later, he's still an opening match guy. He had not really hit his stride yet. He had not won the United States title yet, I guess. He had not won the world title, obviously, yet. Was not a main event guy. But it's nice to see, it's funny. You see DDP versus Chavo Guerrero in the opening match. Soon after this, he would not be, he'd be main eventing, so he wouldn't be doing the first matches anymore. We also had Ice Train versus Scott Norton. I love this pay-per-view also. It's one of my favorite pay-per-views. But Ice Train, I always loved Ice Train. He was a big comic book looking guy like Luke Cage, looked like a world's strongest man, bodybuilder type guy. And him and Scott Norton were a tag team known as Fire and Ice. Scott Norton, obviously Flash Norton being the fire and Ice Train being the ice. There's similar body shapes and stuff like that. It's a submission match, not really, Ice Train wasn't known as a submission guy. I know Scott Norton, I think, utilized the Canadian backbreaker, the over-the-shoulder backbreaker, and maybe a full Nelson, something like that. But Ice Train ended up gets the win here, and it's nice to see him getting a little bit of a push, even though they really didn't do too much with him. Don't sleep on Ice Train. He was a good athlete, didn't really do too much, and I think he was throwing a little bit of pipe backstage, if you catch my drift. They had the AAA Heavyweight Championship defended on this pay-per-view, which I think they referred to as like the Mexican National Championship or something like that. I don't think they said AAA. But you had Conan against Juvi. Okay, two very popular Mexican wrestlers. Conan was obviously like the Hulk Hogan of Mexican wrestling in like 94, 95 and stuff like that before he jumped ship over here. So it's, it's nice to see AAA get a little bit of a rub there. And I don't even know if AAA, I'm not sure if they are even a federation anymore. I know CMLL is the big one in Mexico, but I don't know a whole lot about lucha or wrestling and stuff. Okay, then boom, in the fourth match, you got Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho, and they gave it 15 minutes. Again, I've talked about this in my other videos. Any sort of chain wrestling type matches from two dudes that are mat-based wrestlers, it's not Hogan versus Andre where you're just going to see clubbing and forearms and body slams. If you got guys like Rob Van Dam and Jerry Lynn, guys like Dean Malenko versus Eddie Guerrero, guys like Lance Storm versus, Rob Van Dam. Any day of the week that's going to be money, whether it's a house show or a Monday Night Raw or a Nitro or a pay-per-view, they're always going to be great matches. Benoit and Jericho were good friends. They obviously did a lot of stuff in Japan together, and I think they did some stuff in Mexico together. So that right there alone is almost worth the price of admission anytime you have two guys like that. Another all-Mexico match, basically you got Rey Mysterio Jr. versus Super Calo for the Cruiserweight title. WCW did a very good job, especially at the time, of establishing not only international guys like Mexican guys, German guys, Japanese guys, but also establishing the cruiserweights. And there really wouldn't be, I don't think there would be as much fan attraction towards stuff like 205 Live now. Stuff, a lot of guys in pro wrestling nowadays are smaller than the referees. There's guys that are in pro wrestling right now that weigh 150, 160, 170, 180 pounds. Whereas back in the day, you would have never even gotten a tryout at something like that. Guys like Daniel Bryan, guys like Leo Rush, guys like Drew Gulak or Tony Nese, or that Drake Maverick. Those guys wouldn't even been probably allowed to try out for referee spots, let alone being champions, world champions, and all that other stuff. And it's thanks to guys like Rey Mysterio. I think Rey Mysterio he's got to be one of the lightest competitors, especially in his WCW days. He got all jacked up when he went to WWF for a little while there, but he couldn't have weighed more than 155 pounds. When he was, I'm sure they gimmicked up his weight, to something more than that. But it's not, again, so it's nice to see those two guys, and I know that they probably did a lot of work together in Mexico too. So you give them something like 16 minutes. That's a good match to watch. It's fun, high spots, Mexican style wrestling, a lot of over the top rope, plancha type stuff. Always good to watch. Following Mysterio and Super Calo, you got Harlem Heat as the tag champions, defeating the Nasty Boys for the WCW tag titles. Again, two great Hall of Fame tag teams any day of the week. Harlem Heat, arguably the greatest tag team in this era of WCW, post Steiner Brothers, the buyout of WCW. Harlem Heat was like 47-time tag champions. And the Nasty Boys, they were sort of more brawlers. They seemed to fare better against, when they had matches with like Cactus Jack and Max Payne and stuff like that, where they could get a little more hardcore and stuff like that. But I love Harlem Heat versus Nasty Boys matches, and this is definitely one to watch. And again, they get 15 minutes. WCW is usually pretty good about giving time on their pay-per-views in this era, let's say, specifically for guys that needed it. You got the Giant versus Randy Savage. This was probably, I'm going to assume Giant was NWO at the time. Let me see. Savage was still not NWO yet, so I'm imagining that, Giant was probably doing some sort of NWO thing. I think he was like the 5th member. So this was a couple months later. He was probably involved, and I know he had gotten beaten the previous pay-per-view. But again, Giant, Hall of Fame, Paul White, Big Show, all day. Randy Savage, obviously, one of the top most talked about pro wrestlers of all time. And Savage could work big guys, and the Giant was really good at working smaller guys. So that's a good, solid, quality match before the main event, which is obviously the War Games match. Again, any sort of War Games-y type, great concept. 2 guys start off, and then one guy gets, one team has the advantage, and they rotate and stuff like that. Always liked War Games, and it's just a great pay-per-view altogether. So that's September of '96. Moving into October of '96, the following month, we got Halloween Havoc. Halloween Havoc, it's cool that WCW did those Halloween type gimmicks. They had a beach gimmick pay-per-view in the summer. They had a Halloween gimmick in October. They were pretty good about stuff like that. And I always liked that they did sort of spooky entry. They had like the video packages were always Halloween-y, and the sets would always be sort of decorated Halloween stuff. So in this pay-per-view, we see another, they got a dark match with Jim Powers, which is funny seeing Jim Powers in WCW. He beats Pat Tanaka. Jim Powers is a local guy, also here from New Jersey. A buddy of mine, Bill Savage, I think was actually his wrestling coach in high school. And I know, Bill Savage and he's a local New Jersey's high school wrestling legend. I was a former high school wrestler. I do a lot of writing on internet articles about high school wrestling, so I got to know Bill Savage that way. And he actually got to coach Jim Powers in high school, and Jim Powers actually wrestled Hulk Hogan at some MSG house show somewhere, as Bill Savage says. So it's funny that I sort of know a guy that coached a guy that wrestled against Hulk Hogan or whatever. You also got Damien, also known as Damien 666, I believe, in Halloween, in a tag team match against Psychosis and Juventud in an all Mexico Lucha Libre match, which is funny because I don't think Damien and Halloween, they got a little bit of play in WCW between their talent trade, like in Battle Royals and stuff like that. But it's just funny seeing them there because they're, when you think of those guys, they're more of, Mexican known guys and not so much being known for WCW. I'm sure a lot of people would even forget that they were in WCW. Okay, for the Cruiserweight title, you got the Cruiserweight title change in hand. Dean Malenko beats Rey Mysterio. And they give it almost 19 minutes, 18 and a half minutes. Any Dean Malenko match and Rey Mysterio match, again, it's that same vein of 2 guys that can chain wrestle, that can shoot and work very well together. And it's funny that Dean Malenko is the big guy in this match because Dean Malenko, I don't think is, he's like 5'6" or 5'7", But again, awesome athletes that knew how to put on a show against each other. You got DDP beats Eddie Guerrero. This is sort of the beginning of DDP, his ascent. He beats a guy like Eddie Guerrero. He's still heel here, I believe. He would go on to win Battle Bowl. This might have been, I can't remember if this is before or after Battle Bowl. This might have been a little after Battle Bowl. But that's when he really, he wins Battle Bowl. And then they did a gimmick where he was down on his luck. He had to sell the ring that he won from Battle Bowl, and then that's sort of where he starts getting more and more involved in storylines. But him beating Eddie Guerrero here is no feat in itself. If you could say that you had a pay-per-view victory over Eddie Guerrero, that's pretty cool. They had the Giant versus Jeff Jarrett here. I'm not a Jeff Jarrett fan. I get it that his father was pretty integral in the business and did a lot, in the Tennessee, Jerry Lawler area and stuff like that. But again, it's tough if you're the son of the promoter, you know, any of the Greg Gagnes, any of the Shane McMahons, or the Mike Grahams, or the Eric Watts. If you're the booker's son or the owner's son or the promoter's son, you always sort of looked at a little differently. And there's never, I don't think there's ever really been one of those guys that's gone on to be Shawn Michaels or gone on to be, you know, a Hulk Hogan or a Ric Flair, or, you know. Tully Blanchard, you know, also son of a promoter. Terry Funk and the Funks, you know, they're sort of, I guess, you know, NWA champions and all that other stuff. But I was never really a Jeff Jarrett fan. You know, and I'm sort of like him a little bit more as I got older. I like this, you know, I like the shtick in the '95 WWF era, whatever. But that's a match I would probably skip over. But you also, now with this, you also got Syxx against Chris Jericho, aka Sean Waltman, X-Pac 123 Kid against Chris Jericho. They really weren't giving Jericho a lot of wins here. I know they didn't have a lot of faith in Jericho at the time, obviously, which was a bad bet. The guy's still wrestling, still the #1 guy in AEW. They didn't really utilize his potential here. I don't think he, you know, I think he got the television title in WCW once or twice and the Cruiserweight title once or twice. But obviously he would go on to be a main event guy, world champion guy, bona fide Hall of Fame guy. So here they had Syxx going over him, but those guys could work together. Basically, Sean Waltman, like we talked about in another video, he could work with anybody. He was sort of the measuring stick of how good of a match you could have. And Jericho, obviously being in his prime at the time and knowing what he was doing, he had gone to Japan and back already. He had gone to Mexico and back already. They're going to put on a good match together. You had Lex Luger and Arn Anderson. Again, if we're talking about just the talent in these videos, when I'm talking about these matches in these specific years, I'm just not talking about the pay-per-views and how good of a pay-per-view they were, or how good of a match each of these individual matches in these pay-per-views throughout these years are. It's just if you think about the talent that's on the roster at the same time. You got Lex Luger against Arn Anderson. Okay, those guys were also in the WCW together in like 1988, or, you know, NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, whatever you want to call it, all that same sort of wheelhouse. And here they are again in the end of 1996, battling it out, which is fun. Luger gets the win by submission there. You also had Steve McMichael coming in now. This was Benoit in the Four Horsemen, McMichael in the Four Horsemen. Mongo McMichael, obviously now known mainly as an internet. It's just fun to make fun of some of his matches and, you know, the botchamanias and all that stuff. They always pick on Mongo for how, you know, bad his work rate was back then. And if you watch some of the matches, he really was, you know, the man won the Super Bowl for the Chicago Bears. Okay, you're a great college, you're a great football player, more power to you. Probably not the greatest pro wrestler of all time, but that's fine. He probably made a lot of money doing it, probably had a good time, made some friends, and hopefully didn't blow out his knees and his back any more than they already were. But it's funny seeing him and Benoit together, and they beat Ming and the Barbarian, the Faces of Fear. Excuse me, Ming and the Barbarian. I love that tag team. Basically, if wrestling were real life, those two guys would have been the tag team champions for as long as they wanted to be the tag champions. But here they don't go over, and they got to do the job for old Mongo, but that's okay. You also had the Outsiders beat Harlem Heat at this pay-per-view for the tag titles. I think this was the Outsiders' first title run. Again, I'm not fact-checking. I'm not doing a lot of studying beforehand or whatever. I sort of like this off-of-the-cuff thing, and then again, at the same time, it sort of shows my understanding of the business and my knowledge. But I think this was the first time they won the tag title. Obviously, they would go on to hold the tag title for a long time and be a dominant tag team, which was a smart move. Them coming into the Federation around this time, you know, in the middle of '96. But you put the titles on them a couple months later. They're the biggest heels in the company. Hogan's got the world title. He's the biggest heel in the company. You know, you started doing that whole faction thing where the factions got all the titles. And it's nice that the Outsiders were able to have a good match against a good tag team like the Harlem Heat. And then in this one, you had Hogan and Randy Savage again for the world title. Hogan's the champion. He beats Savage. Savage has Elizabeth in a neutral corner. Again, if they did it at WrestleMania 6, the Mega Powers Explode was one of the biggest main events and WrestleManias at the time that they were able to do. Yeah, WrestleMania 6, right? No, five, because Savage wins 4 in the tournament, and then 5 is the blow off with Hogan and Savage. So they did it at WrestleMania 5. That would have been 85, 86, 87. That would have been 1989, and then here we are 7 years later, and they're main eventing still. And Savage never really lost a step. He was a good worker up until he retired or stopped doing it. I know the elbow drop was killing him. It was doing bad stuff, I think, for his shoulders and his hip, landing on his hip all the time. Bam. And I know the one match or whatever he did in TNA was sort of not looked at very well because he was shouldn't have been probably coming back. But here in the main event, that's it's good enough, and their star power and all that other stuff. And they were the first 2 guys, I think I talked about that in another video. They were the first 2 big main event dudes to jump from WWF to WCW. They had the Greg Valentines, the Terry Taylors, the Junkyard Dogs, the Jim Powers, the Iron Sheiks, Honky Tonk Mans. They had those guys, Hacksaw, Jim Duggins. Well, I think Hacksaw and Honky were actually after Hogan, but anyway, those guys were jumping. And it's not really going to turn the needle too much, but when Randy Savage is on your program or Hulk Hogan is on your program, that's when you're going to start, getting some money. Okay, so after Halloween Havoc 96, we had World War III. This was the second World War III. The first World War III in 1995, Randy Savage had won. I love that pay-per-view as well. I love Battle Royals. I know Battle Royals get a lot of flack because it's just a lot of dudes forearming each other and standing around, and whatever. But I love Battle Royals, and in my opinion, the more dudes, the better. They did 60 guys here. I'd be all right if they had a 120-man Battle Royal. And especially with Randy Savage winning it, with Hogan already involved, everybody just assumed Hogan was going to win it. It was for a title. Anytime you do like a Rumble for a title or a Battle Royal for a title, I love that because it's good stakes. But here at this one in 96, we had, you got La Parka and Villano 4 in an opener. Again, they were very good about putting over Mexican talent. You had Ultimo Dragon versus and defeating Rey Mysterio Jr. for the J Crown Championship, which is a weird thing to be defended on a title. I know Ultimo Dragon back in the day used to come to the ring with like 17 belts because he had like unified every title in New Japan and All Japan and War and Michinoku Pro. He just had every, Mexican titles, Japanese titles, American titles, and he defends the Super J Crown here against Rey Mysterio, which again, any day of the week, that's a solid match to watch. You had Chris Jericho against Nick Patrick. Okay, that's probably a little bit of a letdown. Nick Patrick is the son of, I believe, Jody Hamilton, who was an executioner maybe or something like that. His father was a big pro wrestler. He ended up not following the footsteps, doing the referee route. But here he gets as one of his probably not many wrestling matches. Jericho has one arm tied behind his back, and they go 8 minutes, but Jericho gets the win. We got Giant against Jeff Jarrett again. I guess those guys liked having pay-per-view matches or whatever. Harlem Heat in this pay-per-view beats the Amazing French Canadians, which were the Quebecers that they couldn't call the Quebecers, so they had to say Amazing French Canadians. Jacques Rougeau and Carl Ouellet. Carl Ouellet currently is going by PCO, doing the whole Frankenstein gimmick and stuff like that. I know he did pretty well. He fell off after he was in WWF for a little while doing the Jean-Pierre Lafitte gimmick with stealing Bret Hart's jacket. Didn't really do too much there. Kind of got buried by the Clique because he didn't want to do the job in Canada for Shawn Michaels or Kevin Nash, something like that. But if you got Harlem Heat against those guys, that's a good match. Jacques Rougeau, I always really liked. I like the Rougeau brothers a lot. I like their tag team finisher. It was called like La Bombe Rougeau or something like that. And it was basically, the guy that Jacques Pierre would have one dude up facing the corner turnbuckle, Jacques, like almost like a heart attack, like how Jim Neidhart would have a guy. Jacques would jump off and sort of do like a whoopee cushion on the dude, so he would basically land on the guy almost like in a bonsai drop, his legs coming up over top of him, and then he would move forward, and the Pierre would sort of do almost like a flip over roll, like a victory roll type thing, and they would use that as a pinning combination. I always liked that finisher, and sort of slept on a little bit. But here you got Harlem Heat against both of them. They give them almost 10 minutes. That, you know, that's a good match to watch. We can skip over Sister Sherry and Colonel Robert Parker. That's a 1:30 match that goes count out. We don't have to worry too much about that. You got Dean Malenko and Psychosis. Again, great cruiserweights. If you were to make a cruiserweight Hall of Fame, two dudes that are probably first ballot guys. Dean Malenko, obviously, they sort of brought him to WWF to sort of be the cruiserweight division guy. Didn't really work out too well. But in WCW, he was sort of running the cruiserweight division as well. He was a guy that could shoot real well, work real well with anybody, against anybody. So, you know, against Psychosis, boom. That's good wrestling. You had the Outsiders as the tag champs against the Faces of Fear and the Nasty Boys in this, and they give that 16 minutes. Again, to me, that sounds like a big brawl. You got guys like Ming, Barbarian, and the Nasty Boys. They're guys that just want to sort of fight in the concession stands. And the Outsiders. Scott Hall can work pretty well. You know, Scott Hall was a good worker. Kevin Nash, big guy, sort of marred by injuries and stuff like that. Here, they weren't too bad off, I guess, or whatever. A little bit of styles clash, but I like three-way triangle matches for tag team matches. When you got 6 guys involved, it works a little better if it's tornado tag, so they can all sort of not be worried about the tag in and out and the countouts and stuff like that. But that's fun. And then the World War III goes to the Giant, and he's an NWO guy. He eliminates Luger last. If my memory serves me, it comes down to like Lex Luger and like 6 other NWO guys. And Lex Luger, you know, sort of Superman hulks up and throws everybody out of the ring except Giant, and then they Giant ends up throwing him out. And then this would turn Giant face again after he wins. He wins the Battle Royal. He wins the title shot. Hogan, being his boss in the NWO, is like, "Oh, you won, but that's great. You're not going to fight me because, you know, I'm your friend and I run the NWO. You won, but now you don't have to go against me. You don't have to get a title shot." And Giant was like mad, like, "No, you're going to give me my title shot." And then that's when Giant leaves NWO and starts fighting them again. So that was fun to see them start that again. The Giant's the biggest guy in the Battle Royal. A little homage to Andre the Giant. It's how are you going to get a guy like that out of a Battle Royal? It's sort of smart booking, makes sense. You know, that's real to life booking. That, you know, the guy that weighs 500 pounds and is 7 foot tall is probably going to be the last guy standing amongst guys like Villano 4 and Jim Powers or whatever. Following World War III, now we're in December of '96, and this is probably where I'm going to cut it off for this era. Because now once we start going from 96 into 97, midway through 97, I believe, is when they started winning the ratings war. And then that's what sort of turns into the Attitude Era. Now, they have lots and lots of programming dedicated to the Monday Night Wars and stuff like that. But this final pay-per-view of 96, it's December 29th, 1996, Nashville, Tennessee. It's Starrcade. Starrcade is the flagship, or should be the flagship pay-per-view. It was sort of their WrestleMania. Or was supposed to be. It was the first pay-per-view. I think '83 Starrcade was like the first ever wrestling pay-per-view that they did. Didn't get a lot of, wasn't obviously looked at as a WrestleMania. To me as a fan, I remember watching Starrcades as a young kid, and I remember watching WrestleManias as a young kid. And WrestleMania always felt a little bit bigger, but again, WWF did a lot of that stuff better. So we got a title unification match opening up for the J Crown and the Cruiserweight Championship, where Ultimo Dragon beats Dean Malenko. Okay, again, Ultimo Dragon versus Dean Malenko. Anywhere in the world, any night of the week, that's going to be a fun match to watch. And here we got them unifying J Crown and Cruiserweight titles. This was really just giving the Cruiserweight title to a guy like Dragon and letting him run with it. I think he probably won it a couple times. You got Akira Hokuto beats Medusa for the WCW Championship. Akira Hokuto, I believe, is Kensuke Sasaki's wife, and she's actually got Kensuke Sasaki in her corner here. Again, I'm not fact-checking that, but I think from the Chara Pro action figure line, they make like a set that's Kensuke Sasaki and Akira Hokuto together. And I'm pretty sure they're married. I could be wrong about that, but again, I'm not fact-checking. You got Jushin Liger versus Rey Mysterio. That's one I've been waiting for. So you got Jushin Liger versus Brian Pillman. Fun match to watch. Rey Mysterio versus Ultimo Dragon, fun match to watch. Liger versus Dragon, fun match to watch. And right here on pay-per-view, we got Liger and Mysterio. It's, you know, best of both worlds. Japan versus Mexico, mask versus mask dude. Not for the masks, but, you know, battling each other, masked dudes. That's always fun to watch. They had Jeff Jarrett beating Chris Benoit in a no DQ match, which I don't like and I don't agree with. Again, Benoit is a smaller guy. This might have had something to do with the 4 horsemen-y stuff. I know Jarrett was like sort of a horseman or wanted to be a horseman. I don't know if he was ever actually officially inducted into the horsemen. But a guy like Jeff Jarrett should not be going over a guy like Chris Benoit. Benoit was one of the best workers in the ring of this era and after this era and stuff like that. And especially in a no DQ match, you know, Benoit's like a ruthless guy. But, you know, that's just how they booked it. They had the Outsiders going over the Faces of Fear again for the tag titles. And we talked about this again. It's like if you do the same match at a pay-per-view for 2 or 3 pay-per-views in a row, it gets, you know, the fans don't want to see it. I get it that we have sort of short memories and stuff like that. You know, we forget about whatever the mid-card matches were on the last pay-per-view. But I hate seeing the same match. WWF is really, really bad with that right now, where they have the same main event for 3 pay-per-views in a row or whatever. And here again, I think the Faces of Fear were in like the last 2 or 3 tag title matches. That's just the booking. I mean, I'm not a booker. I don't run a company, and I don't deal with talent and stuff like that. I know guys like to work together, but that's a sort of bummy booking in my opinion. And now we have Eddie Guerrero beats Diamond Dallas Page in this one for the vacant U.S. title. They had a title tournament. Both guys made it to the finals, obviously. DDP had just beaten Guerrero in the previous pay-per-view in just a regular singles match, and here Eddie gets the win back for the U.S. title. And I think he would go, I think he went on to lose it to DDP later. Again, I'm not checking, I'm not fact-checking or whatever, but I think he ended up losing it anyway to him. Excuse me. And you had Luger and the Giant, again, 2 big dudes. Luger, you know, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda been the next Hulk Hogan. But, you know, the work rate wasn't really there, and he didn't get over as well. Giant, Hall of Fame dude all day. Those 2 big bastards beating each other up, you know, in the semi-main. That's pretty good, you know, to get the fans all into it and stuff like that. And then the final match of this pay-per-view, which again I don't love, is Roddy Piper beats Hulk Hogan in a singles match. Hogan always talked, you know, I think they talked a lot of crap about, you know, Hogan always liked to bring dudes in that had a win over him, and if they had a win over him in WWF, he would bring them into WCW and get his win back on pay-per-views. Ultimate Warrior famously beat Hogan in WrestleMania 6, so they bring the Warrior back in whatever, the 98-99 era, and Hogan goes over. Same thing with, he tried to bring Yokozuna back, and that's another thing not a lot of people know. Yokozuna effectively killed Hulkamania at King of the Ring 93. He beats Hogan, even though it was not clean. Yokozuna pins Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan goes away and does not come back. That officially killed, you know, it's not talked about a lot. Some dudes will talk about it, but King of the Ring 93 is where Hulkamania died. Hulk Hogan did not come back to the company until like, what, 2003, 2004, after that, 10 years, 11 years later, and even when he did come back, he came back as black and white NWO Hulk Hogan. He did not come back as Hollywood Hogan. I mean, eventually he would revert to the Mr. America and the red and yellow and stuff like that. But he was trying, long story short, Hogan was trying to get Yokozuna back into WCW, allegedly, to go over him, you know, get the big win over him. And here we had them, Hogan and Piper, in a singles match. They had the match at the War to Settle the Score, which was one of the first WWF pay-per-views. It was somewhere around that, the Wrestling Classic and WrestleMania 1. I can't remember if it was before, I think it was before WrestleMania 1, because WrestleMania 1 was sort of the blow-off with Hogan and Piper. They had a singles match, and it was a schmoz finish. I think it was a DQ or a count-out, something like that. So this was fun to see Piper get the win over Hogan. I'm sure in Monday Night Nitros and other pay-per-views, Hogan would go over Piper again, and eventually, I haven't fact-checked that, but it's fun to see Hogan letting other dudes go over him, and you know, sort of giving those other dudes a rub, even though Piper was, you know, out of his prime. probably messed up physically. You know, he still had a couple of good years left, but you know, it's just fun to see that kind of stuff. So that's what I was just trying to talk about here, is that if you look at all those names, look at all those matches, look at those pay-per-views, it's not just, you know, don't watch WCW from the start of the Monday Night Wars, from the start of the NWO on. And I feel, you know, it's stupid because I'm literally talking about the few pay-per-views that came after, right after the NWO. But a lot of stuff that gets looked at with WCW is either the end of the line stuff, you know, 2000s, Vince Russo, late '99, you know, where Jeff Jarrett was. They put Jeff Jarrett as the top guy. You know, Sid Vicious breaks his leg, Chris Benoit leaves when he's champion, all that stuff. But WCW 1992 is some of my favorite wrestling. I already did the video about, and this mid 1996 to end of '96. Watch some of the Nitros from back then. Good, you know, that's back when they were trying to keep it short and sweet. They weren't 3-hour shows yet, I believe, and it was a lot of wrestling. They always opened up hot with a good cruiserweight match and stuff like that. So 1996, middle of 1996 to end of 1996 is good quality programming wrestling to watch. If you should so be inclined, check it out on your WWE network. Leave me a comment about it. You can talk some crap to me in the comments if you want. I'm going to try to maybe edit, I'm going to maybe throw some comments for stuff that I missed, because I know, again, I'm going to be forgetting some things in some of these videos that I'm doing. So if I remember stuff I wanted to say or I should have said, I'll probably put it in the comments below. And hopefully I change your mind on a couple of things. So there you go, 96 WCW.